Hello and welcome to this recording of Notre Dame's Researcher Development Session on Literature Reviews, brought to you by the University Library.
Welcome everyone. The session today is about literature reviews. As you know, we're going to cover an overview of the common types of lit reviews, suggested approaches to sort of organising information and importantly searching for the information, which is leading to the discovery. Sort of a quick review of search techniques, very quick, and that might be a flag for you that that's sort of perhaps a rusty area and you may want to register for some of the other sessions coming up like Super Researcher. I'll give you the dates of upcoming sessions at the end. We're also going to touch on capturing and storing information, because you're going to be dealing with large volumes of information when you're embarking on a significant project, and also how to keep track of the research that is available in your area. Okay, so getting started with just types of literature reviews, we're going to cover just some common types. It's not an exhaustive list. Here's a few that we will touch on in a little bit of detail. So a traditional review, which I suppose does form the focus of this particular session, a theoretical review, a scoping review, a systematic review. There's new types of reviews sort of emerging. They might suddenly become popular in a particular discipline. One might be published and then researchers sort of get onto that idea and they can become popular in particular disciplines. So recently we've been hearing about integrated literature reviews in nursing, for example. And that's wonderful that there are new ways of approaching the literature. One of the downsides that there may not be much information about how to go about conducting them. There really only might be one or two sort of papers about how to structure them and maybe only a couple of examples of them. And that can make it difficult if you're looking at something that's quite sort of popular at a particular time. So a literature review can be part of a larger work. So for example, it forms a part of your thesis, or it could be a standalone work. It could be a review article. You might be publishing a systematic review or a literature review, and it can be comprehensive or selective depending on your purpose. So if you're writing a review article or it's the literature review that introduces your thesis, it's going to be very comprehensive. A selective literature review might be something that just forms sort of the introduction to an article that you're seeking to publish, so that provides contextual background on a smaller size piece of work. So the approach that you take is going to depend on what it is you're seeking to do. So are you working on your thesis or dissertation? Are you seeking to publish a review or an article, and you need to work on a literature review as an introduction to that? So people are here for different reasons, and your supervisor will help guide you in the right direction. Okay, so let's start investigating a couple of these common types. The traditional review. It's a critical approach to examining a body of literature, and the critical aspect of this type of review is what's key. So as you would all expect and be aware, it's not a summary of information. It is a sort of a critical examination of what's been published. The emphasis is on the context and the background. So before you move forward in your own research, you need to understand what has come before and what is the context that your research is taking place in. Very importantly, the goal of a review is to identify gaps in the research. And that can provide a rationale for your project. You're seeking to fill a gap, answer sort of unanswered questions, not just sort of rehash what's already been done. And the literature review is a very important step in getting that clear for yourself, but also communicating that to readers and reviewers of your work, that there is a real rationale and a reason for your research. We've talked about that there might be varying levels of comprehensiveness. You might, depending on the topic, if it's a very thoroughly researched topic already, you might just look at what's been happening in the last 5 years of that particular research. If it's not a well-researched topic, you might need to look sort of outside of an Australian context, and you might be looking at the research internationally. So how exhaustive you need to be will sort of depend on what your research question is. And it certainly should avoid bias. And that can be challenging because you've got your research question clear in your mind and you sort of sometimes think you know what you're going to find in the literature, but you need to kind of step back from that and be open to things that agree with what you already know and also disagree. And you should highlight those in a literature review. So show both sides. And a traditional review takes on a narrative structure. A theoretical review is another common type, and that looks at the body of literature on a particular theory. It's more common in disciplines like education, behavioural science, social science theories. So it might look at, it looks at what theories already exist, how they've been investigated, how they've been applied, and then sets up your research by sort of either saying that this is an appropriate theory to investigate, my research question, or perhaps there is a lack of appropriate theories or frameworks for understanding teacher training or some kind of issue, concept, phenomenon. So it looks at whether or not theories are either appropriate or not appropriate for understanding that, and then leads into your research, which might look at that appropriate theory or challenge it with new theories. And again, that's got a narrative structure. A scoping review is quite a preliminary sort of step. It doesn't start with a very clear research question. You can do a scoping review with quite a broad starting question, and then conducting a scoping review could help you determine what your research question might be. So it's more common in health than other disciplines. So it looks at how many, by potential size, we might mean actual number of studies. What's the size and scope available for potential review of a particular treatment, for example. It provides an overview of what's already known on a particular broad starting question. Again, it critically analyses the gaps in the research, and that helps the researcher to refine their research, or also just sort of say, these are where the gaps are. Other researchers may want to embark on future research in those areas. So scoping reviews can get published in health, even though they are relatively broad. And sometimes they have sort of a tabular structure, so they might have a sort of table that represents how many articles were reviewed and what they were on and where they were published, that kind of thing, but it would be supplemented with a narrative commentary. It's sometimes a little bit more descriptive than analytical, this particular review. A systematic review is something quite distinct, and it's not to be confused with just a systematic approach to reviewing the literature, because that's what we hope everyone's review will be like, depending on what it is. But a systematic review follows a very strict method. The research question that is devised to attack a systematic review often follows a particular structure. So in health, it might follow the PICO method or the PICO method. It adheres to the process of searching for this information, adheres to very sort of strict methods which aim at minimising any bias and ensuring the review could be replicated by someone else. It's very comprehensive and exhaustive. It takes quite a lot of time, and it's not unusual for more than one person to work on this type of review, sometimes even a small team. But the findings are recognised to be very reliable. So it seeks to answer a question, and then the findings provide evidence that might be used to inform decision-making in a healthcare setting. And again, that uses a narrative structure as well as tables to sort of outline exactly what was searched and how it was searched, right down to the terms that were used to discover the information. It's quite a technical style of review. A systematic literature review, which is sort of confusing because it has a very similar name, this is gaining popularity in subjects like business and psychology. The name is perhaps a bit of a buzzword because systematic reviews often get published. Perhaps it's this other discipline outside of health kind of jumped on the bandwagon, but the examples that are out there at the moment don't look as rigorous as the sort of systematic reviews we see in health. Then there's some technical differences as well. The search terms that you use in this type of literature review would be things like keywords, as opposed to a systematic review in health, which relies very heavily on subject headings, which is like a controlled terms or vocabulary. So it's a more simplistic search strategy. And we may see more of these coming about. You may have already heard about them in your discipline. And they are getting published, but they don't seem to be very rigorous. And they also may publish in a tabular and narrative format. A literature review is an opportunity. It's kind of it's a wonderful part of the research project, really, and it's probably why you maybe got interested in a topic in the first place, because you'd read a lot of literature on it. So it's a chance to explore everything that's relevant to your topic with the aim of developing a good working knowledge of things like sort of the history of this idea. And then more technically, things like the terminology that's used, the authors that are publishing in this field, that aspect of it will assist you in the kind of searching for information beyond the literature review stage. So that familiarity with things like authors and terminology is really essential. And it's also obviously an opportunity to critically engage with what you're reading, identify areas that haven't been covered adequately, where further investigation is needed. You might also identify methodologies that you could then apply in your own research. You might sort of, see them applied in the literature and determine whether or not they're going to be appropriate for your study. And you're obviously also contextualizing your own research in the field of study as a whole. Critical analysis is absolutely a key element of a literature review. As you would know, it's not a descriptive summary of what has been published. It's organised in a particular way, so the information is reviewed, and then ideas are organised usually according to themes. But that does depend on the discipline. It might be organised according to the types of approaches used to collecting data, analysing data. So it could be about methodology as well. And the aim is to demonstrate a connection between all of the individual pieces of literature that you have read. And the way that actually sort of looks in practice is that your information, papers won't be discussed in isolation from one another. They will sort of be knitted together according to their theme throughout your literature review. It's not sort of paper by paper, it might be theme by theme, for example. And it's obviously related to your own project. So the kind of literature that you're looking at and how you analyse it, what emphasis is placed on what is based on your own research question. It's guided by your own research question. So how might you critically analyse the literature? Let's unpack that a little bit more. That might be things like identifying trends, patterns in particular studies, comparing and contrasting different views on an issue, so showing both sides, highlighting when authors disagree with one another on particular topics. The critical reading aspect, you might criticise things like how the data was collected, the sample, the approaches to recruiting participants, all these various aspects that might be sort of critiqued in the review. The synthesis will involve grouping authors together who form similar conclusions or discuss similar themes. We've talked about gaps in the research. That's obviously happening in the analysis as well. You're highlighting where your research might fit in, what is the rationale for your research, and how does your research relate to these studies that have already been conducted. So we can kind of think about the review in 3 stages. So the first stage could be called familiarisation, and that's looking at becoming familiar with what's been done, what studies have been done, and what do we know as a result of those studies. So you're highlighting just this first instance, key concepts, what are the kind of main ideas that are jumping out at you? Is there a particular paper or a number of papers that are frequently referred back to, in other papers that you're reading, and who are the authors of these papers? You start to see names come up frequently. You'll notice relationships between ideas and between papers. So at this stage, it's good to kind of have a sort of detective approach. You're following up on leads, you're seeing a name pop up frequently, you check their research out, investigate that a little bit further. You're sort of an investigator. That's just my analogy. That's a mindset that I think is good to adopt when you're searching for new information. The second stage is where you're starting to organise the information that you're coming across and thinking about it more critically, not just becoming familiar with it. So this is where you're starting to draw out themes, gaps, discrepancies between people's thinking on a particular topic, and starting to organise the information. I suppose if you can think about it, you sort of, if we thought about it visually, and let's say you probably aren't printing these documents out, but virtual piles or actual piles of papers that are organised according to theme, so related articles that are organised by theme rather than on their own standalone types of papers. Also making connections with your own work all the way through this process, and that becomes clearer at this stage because you might have further refined your own research question at this stage. So the patterns should be kind of jumping out at you a little bit in this particular stage, and you're starting to refine the search. This is an iterative approach. Once you've kind of identified the main concepts and organised some of your key papers, you then might go back and search again, maybe on a concept that has emerged that you didn't start searching in the first place, and you need to go back to that concept because you realise that's also important in this particular area. The third stage is about contextualising your own research in this information that you're reading. So that becomes even easier as your research question is refined, and sort of so it goes around again. You will discover new things and kind of have to investigate those and become familiar with those, organise them into what you've already found, and make connections with your own research when you're writing up your literature review. It's also not just over. You don't just sort of do your literature review, put that to one side, and then get started on the other chapters of your work. You'll do a mini kind of literature review as part of your proposal if you're doing a master's or a PhD, and that will obviously be expanded on quite significantly when you're writing up your thesis or dissertation. But you then might be doing 2 other years of research, and you'll need to go back to determine if other information has become available in that time, has other research been published. So it's an iterative process, and you should be remaining up to date with the research in your field throughout the process. So let's get down to sort of more of the technical aspects now when it comes to searching, so approaches to searching and preparing to search, and some of the strategies that you might use. That's what we're going to be discussing now. You need to think about the key concepts and issues surrounding your research question. So even before you've started searching, you would have done some preliminary reading, but there might be a number of threads. There will be, because it will be a complex sort of thing that you're investigating. So that might require, it will require multiple search strategies in order to cover all of those concepts and address all aspects of your research question. So you'll work really hard to get your research question very clear, and then you need to unpack that in order to start finding information on each of the concepts. And a very important part of that step is establishing the key terminology. So at a really practical level, what are the key words? What are the synonyms? Or the related terms to use when you're going to a database. You must prepare and plan the search. It's not a matter of just sitting down at the database and tapping in some terms. You've got to think very carefully about the topic. Obviously, the more you read, the more familiar you become with the terminology and the keywords that are used in the literature. So all the while you're thinking about those, jotting those keywords down, coming back to the database, doing the search again, an improved search now that you have more knowledge about the topic. So multiple strategies will be required. And you need to think about the scope of your search as well. And that's about refining your research question. And that can be done in discussion with your supervisor. How deep do you need to go? How far back do you need to look? Is it a theory that was first introduced in the 50s? You will have to look at that, and then how has it been applied recently. Geographically, what is the scope of your research? You might want to look at Western Australia and then find there is nothing on Western Australia. So you might be applying your research to that context, but you need to explore literature further afield in Australia, for example, or perhaps even further. If it's not a well-researched area, sometimes you need to go into other discipline areas as well, related fields. For example, you might be using a particular methodological approach, and it might not be common in your area. Let's say that's health science. It might be the approach that you want to take might be more common in education. So in order to read about that methodology, you might need to look at a related field, so education, to determine whether or not there's important things you need to take note of in that particular discipline area. And narrowing your scope and determining the scope is important ASAP. Because you might find that there's a lot of literature on your topic, and you need to know, to avoid wasting too much time, what is it in particular that you're going to be focusing on. Okay, so let's look now at that was sort of preparing to find the information. Now, what kinds of information will we be finding? So when we're talking about the literature, we're talking about a collection of all the scholarly writing on a topic, published and also unpublished in some circumstances. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Unpublished might be another PhD thesis, someone's PhD thesis. And the types of information that are most relevant for you will depend on your topic. So databases, you would search a variety of those. No one database is going to cover every publication in your particular field. There's databases that have full text, so you can read entire journal articles. There's also databases that only have abstracts. You'll search a number of those. Journals, you don't want to get stuck just within a few particular journals. So you might search at database level, but once you identify the key journals in your field of research, it can then be a super targeted search to search directly in them. And I'll show you, in case you're not aware, just very quickly how you would do that. So there's a link here for eJournal/ebook title search. So once you've been searching in databases and you start to realize a lot of the things that you're reading are maybe coming out of a particular publication, for example, Restoration Ecology, you could type the name of that journal in here and then identify what databases we have it in, and then you can follow that link and then apply your search again directly in that journal. It's just a more targeted way of searching, and you can be confident that that's quite sort of exhaustive if you tackle things that way. Grey literature is an alternative source of information that falls outside of mainstream academic publishing. So things like government reports, unpublished theses and dissertations, that's that kind of unpublished work. It's in the grey area, it isn't black or white. Newspapers, social media platforms, depending on your research question, your discipline area, they may or may not be appropriate. And then what about beyond the library's collection? So as either staff or high degree by research students, you have access to services like document delivery and interlibrary loan. So when you do a search in Summon, and it says citation only rather than full text, you can access that information via a document delivery request. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about databases. That's where you're finding journal articles, and that includes literature reviews that they are published, as I mentioned. Various types of literature reviews are published, and they are available in databases. There are subject-specific databases and general ones. To give you an idea, under e-resources, this A to Z listing is of all the databases that we subscribe to, and content is available in all of those. If you hover over the I circle, you can get some information about that. That's a pretty overwhelming list though, so you may go to subject guides in your discipline. Let's look at history. And then under journal articles or databases, you'll see some key databases taken from that long A to Z listing that are good for this area. So read the description, check with your liaison librarian if you're not sure, use the subject guides, and this will get you searching beyond Summon, which searches all of the library's resources, and that is a great starting point, but it is good to then get a little bit more focused, and that would be searching in particular databases, and then perhaps, as I demonstrated, maybe even in particular journals as well. Searching directly in a database rather than summon provides a little bit more functionality. You can usually save all of the searches, like the search strategy, the terms that you use. There's quite a lot of help options available within a database. And an advanced searcher, like you guys will be, if you're not already, will be making use of those functions and the help menu. An undergrad would never go to the help menu within a large database, I would think, but that is something that you might take advantage of. You can export results to EndNote from all of the databases, or most of them. And as I've showed you, find them in the A to Z e-resources list. So a lot of databases invite you to create an account. So I could sign in here, and it gives me the option to create an account. And then I can save searches to a folder if this is a database that I'm using all the time. And I would strongly recommend that. So grey literature, we've actually created a guide to assist with grey literature. It covers things like, I'll show you the guide now, institutional repositories. You might be familiar with our institutional repository research online, but how to find all this information, there's some steps here. So how to find other theses and dissertations from Notre Dame, how to find them within Australia and beyond. Conference proceedings. This is a great way to get current information in your field. So the publishing cycle for a journal article tends to be a lot slower. You know, the research might be done, the article is written, it has to go for review, edits might need to be made, and then it can be published sometimes a couple of years after the research was first conducted, whereas conferences are a more up-to-date way for researchers to get their research out there while it's actually taking place, before they've even published an article. That can be very useful to get sort of up-to-date developments in your field. And this goes through, how do you find conference proceedings? How do you find them in Summon? How do you find them in a database that we have called Scopus? And there's step-by-step instructions about how to do that. Then government documents, such as reports, you can find them just by Googling, but there are also some tips here about how to narrow your search down to just search government websites, how to find these documents on Summon, etc. So that's a sort of a really a how-to guide, if you like, and that's called the Grey Literature Guide. That takes you through those step by step. News and social media, as I mentioned, might only be relevant for particular areas. So there's one PhD candidate who's doing some really interesting stuff on sort of celebrity criminals. So he's been looking at lots of newspapers, historical newspapers, and we have very large databases of Australian and international newspapers, regional as well as major newspapers. And that's a database called Thomson Reuters Westlaw. It is a little bit, it's not super straightforward how to get to the news. So if that is a particular area that you need to investigate, please contact your liaison librarian for assistance on how to get to that. TV news as well is accessible. And scholarly blogs might be probably the most common form of social media that you might be interested in accessing. For example, The Conversation. And again, that is a sort of a forum for researchers and academics to discuss issues in a kind of a quicker time frame than normal scholarly publishing. So beyond our collection, you can get access to items via interlibrary loan and document delivery. Trove is a sort of catalogue for all libraries in Australia. So you could find out what books other libraries might have by using Trove, and then you can request those books through this library using the interlibrary loan service. You can, when you're doing a summon search, you may or wish to tick this option here, add results beyond your library's collection, then you'll see things that we don't have direct access to. It will bring your number out hugely, but when you see things like citation online as opposed to full text, and you really want to get to that particular journal article, for example, you could request it, but it will expand the results by a large amount. So try turning it on, turn it off again, see how you go. Google Scholar is another way to explore information beyond the library's collection. When you're on campus, Google Scholar has been set up to also search the Notre Dame catalogue. So if you haven't set that up at home, there are instructions for how to do it, but you just go into the sort of settings, and library links. And on campus, you can see it's already searching the National Library of Australia and Notre Dame. But when you're at home, you would need to set that up. So you just type in University of Notre Dame, Australia, and click Save, and then it will be permanently added to your link. So that's a little menu on the side under Settings. But sometimes things that we don't have access to, you might be able to get a PDF in Google Scholar. So that is an option if you reach a dead end. Okay, citation tracking. This is a very important strategy and approach for advanced searching, but absolutely for the literature review searching. And it is a really key way to ensure your search is exhaustive. And it's about finding, sometimes it's called citation mining as well. It's got various names, but it's a way of finding out, you're reading an article and it's wonderfully relevant, very important to your lit review and for your research. You can read the reference list of that particular article to see who they have cited, but you can also find out who cited the author of this wonderful article you're reading. So it's a real web, and you can go down a total kind of rabbit hole with it, but it's quite enjoyable. And I'll demonstrate how you can do it. There's a number of places you can do it. You can do it in Scopus, and you can do it in Google Scholar, and you can now actually do it in Summon as well. So we'll do a quick demonstration. This is an article that I came across earlier, which will help me demonstrate a few things. Well, first of all, let's say I would like the sound of this article. I read the abstract, but I realised we don't have access. It's only got a citation online. So I could submit a document delivery request for this. Then let's say I read it and I determined that it was highly relevant. The new feature in Summon here, it might show cited by / cited. It might show both. But it opens up this other little window and I can see 156 articles. You can also go to Google Scholar. Google Scholar has this cited by function. This is probably the least kind of reliable because those 690, they won't all be necessarily journal articles or authoritative sources. We can see a book and we can see some journal articles. Because I'm linked to the Notre Dame library link, this check for full text button will connect me with all of Notre Dame's resources as well. And when that's not, you can sometimes try the PDF link. So you can use it in Google Scholar, but just make sure you're sort of critically evaluating the material that it connects you to. And then let's say this one was interesting, then the rabbit hole begins, and you can look at that reference list plus everyone who's referenced this person, and so it goes. But the most, probably my favourite and the most reliable, we don't have Web of Science anymore as of recently, so this will go away, but Scopus. So you can now link to Scopus directly from here. Scopus doesn't have any full text journal articles in it. It's just an abstract and citation tracking database. So if I click on that here, and we'll see a slight discrepancy there. It's telling me from this screen that 55 articles have cited this one according to Scopus. But then when I click on this, actually 295 documents have cited this one. And I think that, I'm not sure exactly what that discrepancy is yet. I think it might be maybe they're 55 that we provide access to in full text, but there's actually a total of 295, I'm not sure. That's a really direct kind of way to connecting with Scopus, this other database. Then I've got a listing here of the 295 that cited that original one. I can check their bibliography for each of those articles. If anyone had cited these articles, I can then go down that rabbit hole as well. In fact, I could sort that by times cited. So this one was cited 73 times. I want to check that out as well. So it's a way to identify the impact an article has had. It's only one approach. If the article hasn't been cited many times, don't automatically assume it's therefore not important. It might be an area of research that doesn't publish a lot in journal articles, for example. They might mainly publish in books. So be aware that this is only one measure of an article's impact in the field. If you didn't come here through Summon, you can also, just in case, if I went back to the search, you may just come to this database through the A to Z list, type in an article that you're interested in, and then you'll find that article here. You can check, there's no full text in here, but you can link out to the full text if we have it. It will check for it to see if Notre Dame provides access. I can see the abstract, the biography. There were 58 references in this particular journal article. I could click on each of them. Everything is hyperlinked. I can click on each of them and follow that number of references and so on. But do spend some time on that particular approach. So let's look now at some sort of practical search tips for particularly searching for the literature review. Be clear on what your purpose is. You've planned your search, you've thought about it carefully, you've already identified some of the keywords, the key terminology in your area. You know what database is good for your particular discipline, so you'll go direct to that database. You are going to use more than one database. And you need to be employing advanced search techniques, things like Boolean operators, which are and, or, and not, phrase searching, which is enclosing phrases in double quotation marks, using filters or refinements, so limiting your search to just show journal articles or review articles. That is, you can also limit your search to in certain databases. And there's various other advanced techniques as well. If they're not familiar to you at all, I encourage you to get to a class on like the super researcher class, or make an appointment with your liaison librarian who can help you to develop skills in those areas. But practice makes, I won't say perfect, practice improves confidence and skill. So do have a go. You'll also search a combination of keywords and subject headings. I'm going to demonstrate that in a moment. But also searching by author might be quite useful, because you might come across an author who's published quite a lot in your particular area, and you want to make sure you're finding everything that they have published on that topic. So I'll show you how to do an author search as well. We've talked about database help menus, citation mining. So I'm just now going to jump back to, let's look at EBSCO. So if I was doing a search, I'll show you what I mean by keywords. I'm interested in reading skills between boys and girls. At primary school level. So I've just got, these are 3 concepts, and I have 1 phrase for each of them. So I'm using a phrase search by enclosing them in different quotation marks. And I could run that search. This particular database I'm using, Education Source, has only given me 14. So rather than assuming that there is no information on this, I would first think my search might not be very good. And I might need to think about some synonyms or alternative terms to some of these phrases. So, and maybe I know them because I'm planning my search, or maybe I know them, I've prepared my search and I've thought about it carefully, or it might be because I've done a little preliminary reading and some articles talked about gender differences, other articles talked about sex differences. The more reading you do, the more familiar you will become with the terms. I could think, oh, actually, elementary school is another option. So I'm incorporating some synonyms to kind of broaden out. I've gone from 14 to 37. Reading skills, maybe there's another term for that. Some databases, like most of the EBSCO ones, will have either a thesaurus, or it might say subject headings up there. And this is what I think I mentioned just briefly there. You'll use a combination of keywords and subject headings. These are just keywords. But if I want to find out what the kind of controlled term is for reading skills, is reading skills the right language to use? You can experiment with these thesauruses. And this tells me for reading skills, I'll be using the term reading instead. So this has got a scope note for reading. So I would expect to find information on the art of reading, significance of books in people's lives, et cetera, et cetera. So I can go back and incorporate reading into my search. Expanded it out again, and then I might also be talking about literacy as well. I might have picked that up by reading a few of the articles. 182 just by improving our search there. And we've used a number of strategies. We've used the Boolean operator OR to incorporate synonyms into our search. We've used phrase search, and we also had a go at using the thesaurus. I also mentioned author searches. So let's say I knew a particular author myself, which is not true, but and I'd done a lot of work on the subject of classroom management, and I know that because maybe I've read 2 papers by this person and they're fantastic, and I want to double check that I'm covering off on everything. So this is the topic, because maybe Farah has written about other things as well, like literacy, but also I'm interested in their work on classroom management. So I leave that just as searching anywhere, but I can change this to author. So that's how you do an author search, and that is useful for literature review search in particular, because you want to sort of track down seminal authors and all of their work. So this is a field. You say search for this term in this field. That's what's happening there. And remember, this is just one database. So if I had quite a good search here, I would then go and try to search in other databases useful in my discipline. And you'll have a number of search strategies that you'll apply. Repetition means you're on the right track. You want to start sort of closing the loop, and you'll read article after article, and then you'll see, oh, yep, they're citing, everyone keeps citing these people. I have also read all of those articles. So repetition is really a good thing, and a sign that you have been, that you're starting to exhaust what's available. So a little bit about how to kind of capture information and how to store it. It's really important to keep track of things from the very beginning, and resources, but also all the keywords that you're using. If you're just sort of sitting down and think, oh, I've got a little bit of time, I might do a bit of a preliminary search, you bash in some keywords. Those keywords might turn out to be really great. They might lead you to some other wonderful keywords. And you don't want to a week later think, how did I find that information? What was my search? So keep track of keywords and your resources. And using a tool like EndNote is a wonderful way to keep track of your resources and all the citations. EndNote is a tool that allows you to export information directly to a database. So there's classes on EndNote if you're not familiar with it. So let's say I liked this article, I could just export it to EndNote. And you need to install EndNote. EndNote is software that you install on your computer, so I'm making it look quite straightforward, but there are introductory and advanced classes to assist with it, but this is just a demonstration. Now I have this particular information here in my library. I've got my citation in APA style. I could even see if I could find a PDF for it. I've clicked on the Find Full Text button. I can also do that from most databases like EBSCO. So I could click on this one and then say Export. Select the correct one, which would be this one for EndNote in the RIS format. Click Save. Here it is. So you can see how using something like EndNote, when you're doing big searches and you think, yeah, all this stuff looks useful, I've read the abstract, don't have time to read it all in detail now, but I want to shoot it all off to my EndNote library. So if you haven't set up something like EndNote now, that is a tool that you're going to need to use. It also allows you to store PDFs, and then it works with Word to help you format the citations in the correct style. So if you want to know more about a couple of the things that I've recently talked about, absolutely recommend you take some session on search skills unless you're super confident in that area already. And if you can't come to the scheduled classes, contact your librarian. The other thing, finally, that I wanted to show you was some ways of kind of keeping track of what you've already found and maybe staying up to date with what you haven't yet found. So I already mentioned creating accounts in various databases, and that allows you to save the search, so you can save the actual terms that you typed into the search box. That's a great way to go back to what you've done and sort of track your progress. You can email search results to yourself as well. But most, I wanted to show you this journal TOCs, or table of contents, journal TOCs as it's often known. And that is this great service where new research can come to you, to your inbox. And if you're doing if you're only doing a project that's going to take a year, it is actually still useful, but it's definitely useful if you're on a longer journey. I'm going to show you my account for it. So you can just Google journal TOCs. This is it, Research Alerts Service. It emails you the journal table of contents. So you'd need to sign in and create an account. You don't always have time. New research could be coming out every month, depending on your area of your field of research. You don't have time to be searching your database. You've done your mini kind of lit review for your proposal, and you're working on other things. But this is one strategy to stay up to date with what's out there. So you would create an account. So I can here search for a journal. Let's search for conservation biology. And that's it there, and I could tick that. And now I'm following it. That's a new one that I've just added, and there's new articles that I haven't seen yet. But if I go to my followed journals, it's as simple as that. You type in the journal that you're interested in, click follow, and then here are all the journals that I follow. I don't want to follow that one anymore. It's gone from my list. You can adjust the frequency with which you receive email. I get in the email the table of contents of all of those journals that I follow. And if anything sounds interesting based on the title, I can go and find that article and read it. So it's an excellent service. And this is also goes back to sort of the importance of searching or getting familiar with the journals in your field, because then you might conduct your search at that journal level. And I showed you that right at the very beginning. Here under the journal title search, you can see if we subscribe to a journal that is important in your field. There might be dozens, there might only be a few. And once you become familiar with what they are, you want to follow them with a journal talk, but also you could start searching specifically in those. That is obviously just a couple of time savers and a way to stay up to date with the research. But I'm going to stop the recording there, and then I will take any questions from the room.